Everyone ignored the millionaire's son until a hungry girl shared her bread and changed everything. The lunch bell rang across Westbridge Academy, filling the hallways with the sound of hurried footsteps and laughter as students rushed toward the cafeteria. The smell of warm bread and fried food drifted through the air, pulling everyone in. The cafeteria filled quickly, every table buzzing with chatter and laughter except for one. In the center of it all sat Ethan, the millionaire's son, at a large, empty table. His tray was perfect: steak, mashed potatoes, fresh juice, but untouched. He sat straight, shoulders stiff, eyes drifting from group to group. He watched the boys telling jokes, laughing so loudly the whole room seemed to shake. He saw the girls whispering secrets, leaning close and giggling. Every sight was a reminder of the world he didn't belong to. He gripped his fork, then set it down again with a clink. Loneliness pressed on him like a heavy weight. The noise around him only reminded him of the silence at his table. His throat ached as if words wanted to escape, but had nowhere to go. He whispered under his breath, "Maybe I don't need anyone," though deep down he knew he didn't believe it. His heart longed for someone to prove him wrong. Memories of his first day flashed in his mind, students pointing, whispering, "That's the rich kid," or saying, "Don't bother, he won't care about us." That was years ago, yet nothing had changed. The ache of being invisible grew sharper. Ethan sighed, pushing the tray away. The steak had grown cold. Food didn't matter anymore. What good was it to eat when the soul was hungry? He leaned forward, elbows on the table, staring at the polished wood. His ears caught bursts of laughter from nearby, a sound that only deepened the emptiness inside. He imagined standing up, shouting, "I'm just like you!" But he knew no one would list. 10. No one would believe him. They never had. The loneliness wrapped tighter around his chest. He clenched his fists under the table, fighting the sting of tears. Suddenly, a faint sound of footsteps reached his ears. At first he ignored it, assuming it was just another student passing by. But the footsteps slowed. They weren't passing. They were coming closer. Ethan froze. That never happened. No one walked toward him. They always walked away. The voices in the cafeteria blurred into distant noise. His heartbeat thumped louder, every second stretching longer. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted his head. A shadow fell across the polished surface of the table. His breath hitched. Someone was standing there. He glanced down first, seeing shoes, worn, scuffed, unlike the polished ones the other students wore. His gaze traveled upward, past the faded skirt, the patched fabric. Finally, his eyes reached her face. A girl stood before him, her hair loosely falling around her shoulders, her eyes locked directly onto his. Ethan stiffened in disbelief. Nobody had ever looked at him that way, so directly, without fear or judgment. She shifted slightly, and in her hands was something tightly wrapped in a napkin. It looked small, rough, clearly not from the cafeteria. Ethan's pulse raced. What was it? Why was she here? Why was she standing at his table of all places? The cafeteria around him seemed to vanish, the noise drowned by the pounding of his heart. She parted her lips as if she was about to speak. Ethan leaned forward instinctively, breath caught, fingers pressing into the edge of the table. His thoughts whirled with questions. Did she want something? Was this a joke? Or was she really about to talk to him? The napkin crinkled softly in her hand as she adjusted her grip. Ethan's eyes locked on it, his chest tightening with anticipation. The air between them was heavy, fragile, as though one wrong word might shatter it. His throat was dry, but his heart was screaming for answers. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. He had spent years waiting for someone, anyone, to break the silence. And now, for the first time, someone had. A girl stood before him, holding something in her hands, daring to step into the world no one else had ever entered. His breath quickened, his mind spinning with hope and fear tangled together. And then, with the weight of the moment pressing on him, Ethan realized the truth. Someone had finally dared to approach the boy everyone ignored. The girl standing before Ethan was not like the others. Her clothes were faded, her shoes worn down, and yet her eyes carried a quiet strength that unsettled him. In her hands, she clutched a piece of bread wrapped in a napkin, held tightly as though it was the most precious thing she owned. Ethan stared, his mind racing. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't mocking. She was simply standing there, looking at him as though she saw someone, not something. Slowly, carefully, she leaned forward and placed the bundle on the table. Her voice, trembling but steady enough to be heard, broke the silence. "Do you want to eat together?" The words hung in the air like something unreal. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his chest. No one had ever said those words to him. Not once in all the years he had sat alone at that table. His throat tightened, his heart thudded, and for a moment he thought he had imagined it. But no, she was still there, still looking at him with a sincerity that pierced through the walls he had built. He looked down at the bread, stale, rough, simple, and then at his untouched plate, filled with food far richer, far fresher. The difference between their worlds could not have been clearer, and yet here she was, offering to share what little she had. His chest ached with a strange, unexplainable feeling, something both heavy and light at the same time. He wanted to speak, to say something, but before he could, the sound of lang, order cut through the moment. The cafeteria had noticed. Whispers rippled through the room like fire catching dry leaves. "Look at her," someone hissed. "Why is she standing with him?" Another voice laughed cruelly. "Maybe she thinks she's special." Chairs scraped against the floor as students leaned to get a better look. The noise swelled, mocking, judgmental, cruel. A boy at a nearby table snorted loudly. "The poor girl wants to sit with the rich kid? What a joke!" The laughter that followed was harsh, echoing against the cafeteria walls. Ethan's ears burned, his body stiffened. All eyes were suddenly on them, the untouchable millionaire's son and the poor girl with stale bread. He felt trapped in the center of a stage he had never wanted to stand on. His hands curled into fists beneath the table, his chest rising and falling too quickly. He could see the way students sneered, pointing, whispering, shaking their heads. The voices grew louder, sharper, each word cutting deeper. The girl shifted uncomfortably but didn't step back. Her fingers tightened around the bread as if it were a shield, her gaze still on Ethan. For a moment he almost envied her courage. She stood there, exposed to the cruelty of everyone around, and yet she did not turn away. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. His thoughts tumbled over each other, chaotic and desperate. If he accepted her offer, the whispers would only grow louder, the laughter crueler. He would confirm what they all expected, that he was too strange, too different to fit anywhere else. But if he pushed her away, if he turned cold like they believed he always was, then he would be safe again. The whispers would fade, the laughter would move on to something else. He could sink back into the silence, unnoticed, untouched. Yet deep down, he knew it would destroy him. His heart waged a war with itself. He wanted to reach for the bread, to reach for her, but fear held him still. Fear of being judged, of being mocked, of letting someone close only to lose them. The cafeteria seemed to lean closer, waiting, watching. Every breath, every second, stretched unbearably long. Ethan's gaze flicked from the girl's determined eyes to the bread trembling slightly in her hands. His chest ached, as though the decision would define him forever. Around them, laughter erupted again, cruel and sharp, filling the air with poison. The moment balanced on the edge of a knife. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. The girl didn't move, didn't retreat. She waited. The silence between them deepened, heavy and fragile, as the world around them demanded an answer. Would Ethan take the hand extended to him, or push it away, like everyone expected? The cafeteria had gone silent, every eye fixed on Ethan, as the weight of the moment pressed down. His breath came sharp and uneven, his chest rising as though the air itself resisted him. For one fleeting second, the world seemed to hang in suspense. Then, slowly, he reached forward. His fingers brushed the napkin, gently taking the bread from the girl's trembling hands. A gasp rippled across the room. Ethan's hands were steady as he unwrapped the bread, its rough texture and hardened edges nothing like the polished meals on his tray. Without hesitation, he broke it in half. One piece he placed back into her hands, the other he held for himself. His lips curved into something rare, something no one had seen before, a smile. It wasn't the polite, empty smile he showed adults, or the stiff smile he forced when photographers hovered. This one was real, unguarded, alive. For the first time, Ethan felt seen. The cafeteria's whispers faltered, then died. The mocking laughter dried in throats. Students blinked in disbelief, unable to understand what they were witnessing. The rich boy, the untouchable heir, was sharing bread with the poorest girl in school. As Ethan took his first bite, the taste didn't matter. What so? What mattered was the warmth that spread through his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't food he had been starving for, it was connection. The girl, Lila, lowered herself into the seat across from him. Her movements were cautious, almost hesitant, but her eyes never wavered. Together, they ate in silence, yet it was the most comforting silence Ethan had ever known. The cafeteria eventually moved on, students returning to their cliques and chatter, but for Ethan, the world had shifted. In that single act, he was no longer alone. Days turned into weeks, and soon the cafeteria scene repeated itself again and again. Ethan no longer sat at his empty table. He sat with Lila. They shared what they had. Sometimes his rich meals, sometimes her scraps, but always together. At first, whispers followed them, sharp and cruel, but Ethan ignored them. Every laugh they shared became a shield, every moment together a victory over the silence that once consumed him. Lila told him stories that made him laugh so hard his ribs ached. Stories of chasing stray cats through alleys, of pretending the stars were jewels she could pluck from the sky. Ethan, in turn, told her secrets he had never spoken aloud. That he hated the way people looked at him like he was a trophy, that his house felt more like a museum than a home, that sometimes he wished he were invisible. With Lila, he could be just Ethan, not the millionaire's son. But one afternoon, as they sat under the shade of an old oak tree outside the school, Lila's voice shifted. The laughter faded from her tone. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap as she whispered, "There's something I never told you." Ethan leaned in, sensing the weight behind her words. She stared at the ground, her eyes glistening. "My mother. She's sick. Really sick. Most days, she can't even get out of bed." Ethan's chest tightened. Lila's voice broke as she continued, "We don't have much. Sometimes I skip meals so she can eat. That bread I gave you that day, it was all we had left." Her words struck him like a blow. He remembered the stale bread in his hands, how proudly she had offered it, as though it was a treasure. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. A storm brewed inside him, anger, sorrow, helplessness. He had grown up in a mansion where food was wasted, tossed aside if it wasn't perfect, while Lila gave away her last piece of bread without hesitation. His heart burned with guilt. "That's not fair," he muttered, his voice low and sharp. He wanted to say more, to scream, to demand answers from a world that allowed such cruelty, but the words stuck. He looked at her, thin, fragile, yet stronger than anyone he knew. The fire in his chest grew hotter. He could not ignore this. He could not unhear her truth. Something inside him was shifting, awakening, demanding action. But what could he do? What choice could he make? His fingers dug into the grass beneath him, his breathing uneven as he fought the storm inside. His mind churned with possibilities, his heart aching with the weight of her suffering. And then, As the sun dipped lower in the sky and shadows stretched long across the ground, Ethan realized this was not just her secret anymore. It was his burden too. He had a choice to make, one that could change everything. The storm inside Ethan never truly settled after Lila's confession. Each day, he carried her words with him, heavy and unrelenting, pressing down on his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. He tried to smile when she smiled, tried to laugh at her jokes, but behind every glance, every word, he saw her tired eyes and the quiet suffering she hid so well. He promised himself he'd find a way to help her, but fate didn't wait for promises. It happened suddenly. The classroom was alive with chatter, papers rustling, pens scratching against notebooks. Ethan sat near the window, distracted, staring at the faint outlines of clouds drifting lazily in the sky. A faint sound broke through the buzz of the room, something like a sigh, followed by a thud. Ethan's heart froze. His head snapped around, and what he saw turned his blood cold. Lila lay crumpled on the floor, her arms limp, her face pale. Her chair had toppled backward, her pencil rolling aimlessly across the tiles. "Lila!" The word tore from Ethan's throat, raw and desperate. He was on his feet before anyone else moved. Students gasped, teachers shouted, the room burst into chaos, but all Ethan saw was her fragile frame lying motionless. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he shook her gently. "Lila, wake up, please, wake up." His voice cracked, his chest tightening as if the air itself had abandoned him. The teacher hurried forward, calling out orders. "Clear some space, someone call the nurse." But Ethan refused to step aside. He stayed kneeling beside her, his fingers clutching hers, as if his touch alone could anchor her back to consciousness. The sound of rushing footsteps filled the hallway. Within moments, she was carried to the nurse's office, Ethan trailing closely behind, refusing to let her out of his sight. The nurse worked quickly, checking her pulse, her breathing, her eyes. Ethan's stomach twisted with every second of silence. Finally, the nurse let out a sigh, her expression heavy. "She fainted," she explained softly, "from hunger." The words slammed into Ethan like a hammer. Hunger. His hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms until it hurt. He blinked hard, but tears still slipped free, burning his cheeks. Around him, the whispers of students drifted like smoke. She fainted. Because she's starving? But she still gave him bread. Ethan's jaw tightened. Their pitying voices were salt on wounds and pierce, ready too deep. He turned away, unable to bear their stares. That night, the mansion felt colder than ever. Chandeliers glimmered above him. Polished marble floors stretched endlessly under his shoes, and golden-framed portraits of ancestors watched him with lifeless eyes. Ethan's footsteps echoed through the hallways as he made his way to his father's study, each step heavier than the last. His stomach churned, his throat dry, but determination anchored his stride. He couldn't stay silent anymore. Not after seeing Lila collapse. The grand doors loomed ahead, tall carved oak with brass handles that gleamed under the soft glow of the hallway lamps. Ethan stopped before them, his hand trembling as he reached forward. For a moment he hesitated. He had entered this room countless times, but always with fear, always with the weight of his father's judgment pressing down on him. Tonight would be different. He pushed the doors open. The study was vast, lined with towering bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, casting flickering shadows against the walls. Behind an enormous desk sat his father, the man everyone feared, the man whose name commanded respect, the millionaire who seemed untouchable. He was hunched over paperwork, glasses perched on his nose, a fountain pen moving steadily across the page. The smell of ink and polished wood filled the room. Ethan stood just inside the doorway, his voice caught in his throat. His father didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, as though Ethan were just another shadow cast by the fire. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, gathering every ounce of courage, he stepped forward. His shoes clicked against the floor until he stood in front of the desk. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. He swallowed, his voice trembling. "Father," he said. The man didn't look up. "What is it?" His tone was clipped, impatient, as though anything Ethan had to say would surely waste his time. Ethan's fingers curled at his sides. Words almost died on his tongue, but the memory of Lila's pale face, her body collapsing in front of him, burned too fiercely to let him stay silent. His voice shook, but the determination in it was unmistakable. "We need to talk," Ethan said. His father finally looked up, his eyes sharp, cold, unreadable. Ethan's chest tightened, but he pressed on. His voice grew steadier, even as tears stung his eyes. "We need to talk about Lila." The words hung in the air, fragile yet unbreakable. For the first time, Ethan didn't look away. He didn't shrink back under his father's gaze. He stood tall, heart pounding, waiting. The study fell into a silence so heavy that Ethan could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. His father's piercing gaze lingered on him, cold and unyielding, as though he were dissecting Ethan's very soul. The crackling fire in the hearth cast shifting shadows across the man's face, sharpening the stern lines etched by years of power and control. Ethan's breath quickened, but he stood firm, his fists tightening at his sides. Finally, his father set the pen down with deliberate care, resting his hands together atop the desk. His eyes narrowed, icy and calculating. "Why do you care about this girl?" The words were calm, almost too calm, but they carried a sharpness that cut deep. Ethan swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, but he forced the words out. "Because she's not just a girl. She's my friend. She's the first person who ever sat with me, the first who didn't see me as a millionaire's son. She gave me bread when she had nothing left. She showed me kindness when no one else would. And now she's starving, while we live in excess." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "I can't ignore that. I won't." His father's expression didn't change. He leaned back slowly in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The silence stretched on, suffocating as though the walls themselves were listening. Ethan's chest heaved, waiting, wondering if he'd said too much or not enough. At last his father exhaled, a long, measured breath. "So," he murmured, "this girl has done what no one else could. She's made you feel something real." His eyes gleamed, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "Interesting." Ethan's heart pounded louder. "Please, father," he urged. "She needs help. Her mother is sick. They barely survive. We can do something. We have the power to change her life." For a moment, the millionaire stared into the fire, its flames reflected in his cold eyes. Then he turned back to Ethan, his voice low and deliberate. "If she truly means that much to you, prove it." Ethan blinked. "Prove it?" His voice wavered with confusion. His father reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, placing it on the polished wood between them. The gesture was small, but the weight of it was immense. "Inside is a challenge," he said. "A test. Pass it, and you will not only secure this girl's future, but also prove yourself worthy of something greater, my trust and your place as my heir." The room seemed to shrink around Ethan. His pulse raced as he stared at the envelope, its edges sharp under the lamplight. "And if I fail?" he asked quietly. His father's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smirk. "Then you will learn a lesson about weakness, and she will remain exactly where she is." The words were cruel, but his tone was calm, as though he were discussing business, not a human life. Ethan's breath hitched. Rage boiled beneath his skin, but he bit it back. He wanted to shout, to demand why compassion needed to be proven through games, but he knew better. His father thrived on control, on watching others squirm beneath his power. Any sign of defiance now would only close the door completely. With trembling hands, Ethan reached forward and picked up the envelope. Its paper felt heavier than stone. He could almost feel his father's eyes drilling into him, waiting for hesitation, for weakness. Ethan met his gaze instead, his voice steady. "I'll do it." His father leaned back, satisfied. "We shall see." He waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to his papers, as though the entire conversation had been nothing more than another transaction. Ethan's chest burned as he turned and walked toward the door, the envelope clutched tight in his fist. Each step echoed like a drumbeat of destiny. When he reached the hallway, the weight of what had just happened sank in fully. He pressed his back against the cold wall, tearing the envelope open with shaking fingers. Inside was a folded sheet of thick paper. His eyes scanned the words quickly, his heart dropping lower with every line. His father's test wasn't simple. It was a task designed to break him, to force him to prove his loyalty, his resourcefulness, his strength of will, the kind of challenge that could cost him more than just pride. It could cost him Lila. Ethan's breath came shallow, his mind reeled, his stomach knotted. Yet beneath the fear, a spark ignited. This wasn't just about inheritance. This wasn't just about proving himself. This was about her, about the girl who had given him bread when she had none, who had shared laughter in his loneliness, who had trusted him with her secret pain. For her, he would face anything. For her, he would prove it. The night before the challenge began, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the envelope that had rewritten his destiny. His heart raced, but not because of the inheritance, not because of his father's looming judgment. It was because of Lila. Every moment he closed his eyes, he saw her fainting in the classroom, her thin hands clutching bread she should have eaten herself, her tired smile hiding hunger. That iron became his fire. The challenge his father had set was brutal, designed to crush entitlement and expose weakness. Ethan found himself thrown into tasks that demanded endurance, sacrifice, and resilience. He was stripped of his privileges, forced to survive without the wealth and comfort he had always known. The nights were cold, the days long, and each trial tested the edges of his will. But every time he faltered, every time exhaustion clawed at him, he remembered her. He remembered the taste of that dry bread, the look in her eyes when she gave without expecting anything in return. It wasn't pride that kept him moving. It wasn't fear of losing his place as an heir. It was the image of a girl who had nothing yet chose to share. That memory was stronger than hunger, stronger than pain. Weeks blurred together, and Ethan pushed himself beyond limits he never knew existed. He fell, he bled, he stumbled, but he rose again, each time fiercer than before. His father watched from the shadows, silent, expression unreadable. There were moments Ethan wondered if the old man was waiting for him to fail, to prove once and for all that he was nothing more than a spoiled boy. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. When the final trial ended, Ethan stood, battered but unbroken. Sweat drenched his body, his clothes torn, his muscles trembling. Yet his eyes burned with determination, steady and unyielding. He had not fought for gold or for legacy. He had fought for her. Back in the grand study, the silence returned. Ethan stood before his father, chest heaving, the last of his strength holding him upright. For a long while, the millionaire said nothing. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and the weight of years hung heavy between them. Then, at last, his father gave a single nod, a quiet, deliberate gesture. "You've proven yourself," he said, his voice low, almost begrudging. "Not for wealth, not for me, but for something greater." Ethan's eyes stung, but he refused to let tears fall here. His father's words weren't warmth, not quite approval, but they were acknowledgement, and that, it was enough. The change came swiftly. Within days, Lila and her mother were moved into a modest but beautiful home. Doctors arrived to provide care her mother had long been denied. Warm meals filled their kitchen, clothes replaced the worn rags Lila had grown up with. For the first time in years, hope flickered in their eyes. Lila couldn't understand it at first. She had stood on the edge of despair for so long that light felt foreign, fragile, like something that could disappear in an instant. But when Ethan arrived at their door, exhaustion still etched on his face, she understood. He had fought for this. For her. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Ethan led Lila up to the school rooftop. The city stretched out below them, endless and alive. A breeze lifted her hair, carrying the scent of blooming flowers from somewhere far away. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was comforting, familiar. Finally, Ethan turned to her. His voice was soft, almost breaking. "Do you remember the day you gave me bread?" Lila smiled faintly, her eyes lowering. "Of course, it was all I had left." Ethan's chest tightened. He took her hand, steady and sure. "That day, I had everything in the world but nothing inside. You shared a piece of bread with me when I was empty. And because of that, I'll share everything I have with you." Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to tell him how much his words meant. But her voice failed her. Instead, she squeezed his hand, her tears glistening like diamonds in the fading sunlight. The boy who had once sat alone at a table, ignored and feared, was no longer alone. And the girl who had once starved quietly, hiding her pain from the world, would never be hungry again. Together, they had rewritten the story that others tried to dictate for them. Above them, the sky deepened, stars beginning to pierce through the twilight. And in that moment, it was clear, their lives had been changed forever.